The reason I was going to Portsmouth, Virginia, or was in Portsmouth, Virginia, was to attend COMDAC school.
Gonzo, the Coast Guard years. Boston, Episode 6. COMDAC and some Chiefs.
I think it was the same year that I had gone back to New York City that I went to Portsmouth, Virginia as well. There's a Coast Guard training center in Portsmouth. There's also, there's also some 270s. There was a couple of 270s. I think there was two. But the reason I was going to Portsmouth, Virginia, or was in Portsmouth, Virginia, was to attend COMDAC school. COMDAC, one of the things I was going to have to learn to work on, fix, and do all that kind of crazy stuff before I went to a 270. It also meant that I was going to have to share a room with a few other people. And by few, I really mean a couple. There were two dudes. One was a guy named Todd. Todd I knew from back in Boston. He was also at the support center the same time I was. I didn't see him all that much. He's probably going to schools of Y. And also, I didn't dislike or hate a bunch of people or too many people out there. But Todd was definitely somebody I did not like. He was a bit shorter than I was. Maybe a lot shorter than I was. He was loud and obnoxious. And he was basically overall just a Weasley dude who would just jump from one side or one opinion of something. If he thought the other side was winning, he would jump to that side. He was definitely what I would consider a fair weather person. I mean, again, he always thought that, anyway, he thought he was a cool dude, and he just wasn't. For all of his cockiness, he was basically just a follower, and as I said, a fair weather human being, which is not to say he was a good person. He wasn't a bad guy. He just really annoyed the shit out of me. But he was also very smart too, and a ton smarter than I was. But as I said, if the poo ever hit the fan, he would jump to the other side, do anything he could to save his own ass, or if he thought he would receive some kind of reward for his actions. I mean, the dude would probably sell out his own parents if he thought he was going to benefit from it. The other dude was this guy named Greg. Greg was taller than me, and he also wore that stupid Coast Guard mustache that so many people did. Greg was also pretty smart as well, but I was not a fan of his at all. He was basically a bully. He grew up somewhere in Florida, and I think he was also stationed in Florida as well. Unlike Todd, although I wasn't a fan of Greg's and really didn't like him all that much, I did have I had some kind of respect for the guy, mostly because it didn't matter what the situation was. If Greg had an opinion about something, he didn't waffle. He just stuck with it, even if it was different than what Todd was thinking. Oh my God. Dude, it was just like being back in high school. Todd would say something and he would look to see if Greg would react. And if he got the sense that Greg was in agreement with him, he would just press his issue because he had Greg to back him up on it and support him. And God, it was so fucking petty. But anyway, Greg was way smarter than I was too. And the last thing I wanted to do is to alienate anybody, because as the song goes, I get by with a little help from my friends, or at least people that felt sorry for me. Another ET school. This was going to be a long ass 2 months. Come Monday morning, though, the three of us walked from the barracks, which wasn't too far away, to the building that we were going to be learning about COMDAC. When we got there, they led us to the room where we would be spending the bulk of our days, which is basically a big classroom. And by the classes were all day long, too. It was amazing to me just how much information they could shove down your throat in a day. What really sucked, though, is that I would get distracted or just zone out like the entire class. I had no ability to stay focused during any of the training that they were giving. Yeah, I couldn't stay focused most of the time, and everything just kind of got jumbled together. And at some points during the class, if you ever saw like any of the Charlie Brown cartoons when they were in class and you would hear the school teacher and she just sort of made that garbly, mumbling sound, that's pretty much all I heard, like practically the entire time I was there. Anyway, as was my normal thing, what I thought was most interesting in the class were the people. One of the things that surprised me about this particular class versus all the other ones I would end up going to, this one had a ton of Coast Guard Chief Petty Officers. My roommates were all third class petty officers. At least Todd was. And Greg, I'm pretty sure he was a third class. He might have been second. I don't remember. The class had 3 chiefs in it, I think. At least 3. And all 3 of them were going, or I think the 3 of them were going to be headed to a Coast Guard 270 eventually. They were basically going to be in charge of the ETs on the ship. There was Chief Z that was there. He was this tall, lean dude. He wore glasses and looked very mousy. He pretty much looked like your typical Coast Guard electronics technician chief, or ETC. There was also, I call him Chief Skipper. He was kind of a super jolly kind of guy with a big old bushy mustache, and he was tall and a bit round around the middle. He basically looked also like your typical Coast Guard chief. Yeah, but he was really out of shape. Probably one donut away from a massive heart attack, but he was such a nice guy. The other chief, and this dude really tried hard to be super, super serious. But deep down, I think he was a regular guy with a great sense of humor. He just really tried to be serious. And you had to have a conversation with him in order to, get past the serious demeanor he always put out there. And so this is going to sound very stereotypical, but this chief was an African-American guy, black guy. And I'm sorry, I'm sure there's some politically correct way to say all that, but I clearly, that's not me. The weird thing is, and maybe I was wrong about this, maybe the timing was wrong, but I don't think it was still normal, that's normal in air quotes, for there to be a ton of, black chiefs in the Coast Guard. There was one chief on the Thetis when I was back there. He was a black dude. And the weird thing is that chief did not go through the normal chief's initiation. I can't say with any certainty, but the intention of the initiation was to make it clear, and it was definitely aimed at embarrassing the new chiefs. Basically also it was to keep them humble, because everybody, lower than a chief in the pay grade scale, you basically, when you needed something to know something, you expected your chief to know it. I mean, they were supposed to be experts in their field. Chief was supposed to know everything. Even it might have been unfair for a chief to have that kind of responsibility. But again, part of that, I think the initiation was to really make sure that somebody who was becoming a Coast Guard chief was as humble as they could be. And I never met a humble chief, by the way, never. But I think it was just to prepare them for just the type of responsibilities they were inheriting as a Coast Guard. Considering that most people didn't become a chief really quickly in the Coast Guard, I mean, it took a bit. It usually took about 8 years or more to become a chief. But I did know one chief that didn't quite follow that path, and he got there really quickly. But we will talk about him next season. You're going to have to stick around for at least one more season. I think one more season. You're so lucky, aren't you? But I'm babbling. It took a while to become a chief in the Coast Guard. So because of that, you tended to get a lot of experience, and you got to learn your job and your field and all the stuff that, it took to be a chief in the Coast Guard, which isn't to say that chiefs knew everything. They knew most everything. And anyway, I do have respect for the chiefs, and some more than others. These guys were pretty cool. But so the chief I was talking about, we'll call him Chief Spencer. And I think Like Todd, I think he and Todd ended up going to the Spencer. So they were there at the same time. Just, they arrived at different points. I think I also ran into Chief Spencer while I was in Boston at some point. I think he had already been assigned to the Spencer, and I was back at EMD just making my rounds around the base. Basically, I was just screwed. But Chief Spencer always came across uptight. I think he was compensating or something. And I'm pretty sure he felt like he needed to compensate as well. Because again, as I mentioned before, wasn't a whole lot of black chiefs in the Coast Guard. So I think he was just trying to present always professional demeanor and not your stereotypical sort of Coast Guard chief personality. I don't know. It's never any of my business anyway. And he and I never really talked about it. But he did have this thing that he did. He almost always wanted to provide stern and sometimes unsolicited advice. I know he meant well, but it really annoyed the shit out of me. But I think he did it because he was looking out for my best interest. And it only took me, I was only 20 years old at the time, and I probably wasn't very interested in someone giving me advice in my best interests because I was only 20, and you're 20 years old, you know what I'm talking about, or if you were 20. There was also a petty officer first class there as well. He was kind of a lean guy, and I'm not sure. He was heading to a 270, I think, and I think he actually ended up at the Seneca, Coast Guard Cutter Seneca. He was what I would call a pretty mature gray hair. He had more gray hair than anybody, including the chiefs. Dude, that guy looked like he was rode hard and put away wet. I mean, he looked old, but this dude was also like a serious, salty fucker as well. He was stationed on Coast Guard icebreakers as an electronics technician. He had crossed, if not all, but most of every major line across the globe. What I mean by line, I mean like the International Date Line, the Tropic of Cancer, Capricorn, and I think he had been across both the Arctic and Antarctic circles and the equator too. I think he officially had been to all 7 seas. I think, might be wrong about that. Maybe he'd only been to 6. Yeah, he had been stationed, I believe, on the polar icebreakers. And while he looked like he'd be a quiet guy, he was so not a quiet dude. He was loud and mostly funny as shit. Nothing flapped this guy. Because although he was a bit high strung at times, but he was basically pretty cool. He wasn't like anybody. I mean, he was on an icebreaker, and there's like a whole different community of posties that are on icebreakers. Again, he could get a little wound up, but he was a cool cat. Yeah, anyway, he also had this. He was one of the first guys in the Coast Guard, not the first, but one of the ones that openly displayed tattoos. Because there wasn't a whole lot of guys that I met in the Coast Guard that had tattoos. A couple of the chiefs did. And they were Harley Davidson bikers. So I think the tattoos kind of came along with their after Coast Guard day lifestyle. But this dude had a tattoo of a square knot. So basically a piece of rope tied into a square knot on his forearm. And that dude was super proud of that. I don't know the whole story, and I'm not going to bother looking it up because that would just require too much effort on my part. But he was a square knot sailor, and so I'm not even sure what that really means anymore, but that was way cool for him and for me because, anyway, he was super proud of that square knot tattoo. And at the time, I had none. So it was even cooler because somebody had a cool tattoo, and I didn't have one. So we had 3 or 4 instructors. One of the instructors was a pretty salty fucker, too. He was a Coast Guard Master Chief, which meant he was a chief with, the little anchor symbol on his collar device, but his had 2 stars on it, which meant he had been around for a really long ass time. And as a Master Chief in the Coast Guard, basically nobody wanted to fuck with you. And if they did, they probably would live to regret it. And he was also, with the exception of, the Jolly Chief, they were all pretty lean dudes. And of course, this one was lean, tall, lean, and had a big bushy ass mustache as well. Not the typical Coast Guard regulation. I mean, not at all, but he was a Master Chief, and I really would dare someone to say something to him about his mustache. That was not going to be a good conversation with anybody. He was also pretty funny, and although I think he used to pretend that he was grumpy, but I think deep down he was just super sarcastic as hell and just, super laid back. We also had an ET1 electronics technician, first class, who's also an instructor. Pretty sure he was an ET. He was this bald dude, and also he had that god-awful Coast Guard mustache, which I really should have grown one, as much as there were so many people around me that had one, but I couldn't. I looked like a complete bumbling idiot. Also, I don't think this dude had actually had a lot of sea time. I'm not even sure he was a coastie that had ever been out to sea at all. So it was a little weird him teaching this stuff, but I guess you don't need to be on a ship to teach it. But I think it probably would have helped. Yeah. Not so sure that it gave him a lot of credibility, at least not with me. What the fuck did I know? I'd only been on a ship for a little while, and the guy had been in way longer than me. So whatever. He ended up being our main instructor. We spent most of our time with him to learn COMDAC. And then there was another ET1, and she, oh my goodness, she taught what I think arguably was the most boring section. And it wasn't because she was boring, it's the thing was boring. And the thing she was teaching us was this black box called the DCU, which was the Data Converter Unit or something like that. So what the DCU did was it took all of like the ship's inputs and it routed them all to this black box. The ship would take all this data and then it would process it and do stuff, and it would display it on a radar screen, and it would help the ship. Anyway, COMDAC used that stuff to do its voodoo. And anyway, she was also pregnant as well. And so I think, dealing with the whole pregnancy thing, they gave her the most boring unit to teach. So I'm sure she was not happy about that at all. The whole thing, COMDAC, would be completely pointless without the DCU. While it was super boring, it was, again, arguably probably one of the most important things to learn in the system. So the first day was a lot of just procedural stuff and administrative stuff. But we also, one of the cool things on the first day was that my roommates and I were given access to the morale vehicle. And I don't even know why they called it a morale vehicle. I guess I got the impression that it was implied that when you said morale vehicle, it meant it was good for morale. But anyway, I always thought that was silly. But the morale vehicle was this big ass white van. It was like one of these big ass vans that I grew up and my mom had the big blue van, which I think everyone called like the blue bomb. I think it seems to like ring a, anyway, I'm babbling, but it was a big ass white van, is at least as big as the van that, my family had when I was growing up. And the Coast Guard Master Chief let us use this van every single day. We got to keep it after hours and on the weekends too. It was great for us getting off base, going into town, and just getting away when we felt like it. We'd go grocery shopping, but it was just to buy snacks and shit that we could eat in the barracks and eat in the TV room that was there. So it was good for that. And so, but at the end of each day, though, we'd have to go sign the morale vehicle out from the chief. And then usually we'd end up at McDonald's or Taco Bell or, oh my God, I used to love Taco Bell back in the day. Oh, so we would, in the middle of the night, we would drive up to the Taco Bell drive-through and we would order, a box of tacos, and each box had like 10 tacos. We'd get, 10 hard tacos, 10 soft tacos. Sometimes we would get 2 boxes of that. So we'd have 20 tacos. It was the fucking best. And we would also take trips down to Virginia Beach occasionally. But Greg was from Florida, and I think he was not a fan of Virginia Beach. I mean, if you lived in Florida, you probably wouldn't be a fan of Virginia Beach either. But Todd, he always called it Va Beach. Va Beach. Hey, let's go to Va Beach. Oh, that used to annoy the crap out of me. I'm from Northern Virginia, and we never called it Va Beach. Let's go to Va Beach. Yeah, man, I just wanted to punch that guy right in the neck. Our daily routine was, I don't actually remember if we ever ate breakfast. Maybe we did. I just don't remember. I don't know. We would get up. We would drive the van to class. We'd sit through all the morning sessions. And then during lunch, we would go to the enlisted club, eat there, back to class. And usually after work, go back to the enlisted club, eat dinner or have a pizza delivered. What I thought was kind of a pain in the ass was that when we had to call from a payphone if we wanted anything. And then we had to go down to the lobby of the barracks and wait for the pizza. I mean, we were pretty lucky overall because I think in the barracks we had an entire wing of the floor to ourselves, or at least it seemed that way, because whenever we went to the TV lounge that was like right across the hall from our room, there was never anyone there but us. So I thought we were pretty well off. Yeah. Living with these two was arguably one of the least favorite set of roommates that I'd ever had. It's like they took every opportunity to piss me off. To say that they picked on me wasn't exactly right, but they both would take turns giving me shit whenever it suited them. As I said before, Todd was just a loud-mouth follower. He always acted like such an asshole. Honestly, I think he did it just to impress Greg, because Greg was basically a bully, but that was a type of personality that I could work with. He just really pissed me. I think he always seemed desperate to be noticed or to get in on the action, even if he had nothing to add. And I should say, especially if he had nothing to add. He was like the king of leeches. He would just, I don't know why I'm complaining about him so much. God, that guy pissed so much. And you know what? Forget it. Anyway, he pissed me off a lot. But so this went our routine for the next month or so. It wasn't always that bad. When the weather was nice, we would, or we had time and we didn't have anything else to do, which we really never had anything else to do. I mean, nothing really interesting. We would go to the pool. Usually, though, before we went to the pool, I would go to the gym before I headed to the pool. I was so damn skinny. I really needed to put on muscle. I really wish, though, I had known what I was doing way back then, because I didn't know squat. Not that I know a lot now, but I know more than I did then. So, yeah. But I don't know if it was weird or just interesting, or Greg would always give me props for going to the gym first before I went to the pool. I don't know why, but he did. And I was actually thankful that he wasn't being an asshole about it. So earlier I mentioned that we were going to the enlisted club, usually during lunch and then sometimes for dinner. And on one particular occasion, most of the class was in the club. It might have been during lunchtime, but I feel like it might have been after working hours. So maybe dinner time or whatever. I don't know. But I was walking to a table with food. I might have had a drink. I don't know. So I see this Coastie sitting at a table and he's giving me the stink eye. It's not like the one that the stink eye that he wants to punch me in the mouth or anything like that. But, I wasn't sure what he was thinking. I mean, because he wasn't giving me that look like he was mad at me or something. He just started to look at me. And as I started closing the distance, moving in his direction, totally looked familiar to me. Holy shit. This dude was in boot camp the same time I was. I don't think he was in the same company that I was, but he and I had permissive orders together right after boot camp. And if you remember, I don't think I ever mentioned permissive. I'm sure I mentioned permissive orders. Sure I did. Essentially, permissive orders is what they gave you right out of boot camp and basically gave you an extra week at home to do, local recruiting. So you went back to your old recruiter and they would just basically have you schlep back to your old school. In this case, I went back to my old school and this dude went with me, which was totally cool. Yeah, that's exactly where he was from. And again, I don't remember if we were in the same company or not, but we went together. He traveled with me to my old high school. It's been well over a year, and I'm surprised we actually recognize each other. Let me digress a little bit about the whole permissive orders thing. As I mentioned before, or actually I did mention it, Son mentioned it, that this is not in any way a recruiting podcast. Buddy, relax, chill out. But permissive orders wasn't so much about recruiting. It's just, honestly, the recruiters use it as a way to just, give me an extra week at home, which is kind of cool. I remember that I would have to drive from my home to the recruiter's office, and that took like an hour every time I went there, at least an hour. And I always had to borrow my aunt's car. And I was really fortunate she let me use her car to get back and forth. But so I've been going up there for like nearly a week. And on the last day, might have been a Thursday. I think they just told me not to show up on a Friday, or maybe, anyway, it's one of those days. But on the last day of permissive orders that I had to go, I went to the recruiting office and they suggested it would be a good idea if I went to my old high school. To tell you the truth, I was so not into doing that. But it's not like I really had a choice in the matter. The petty officer that was at the recruiting gave me, and this dude, we'll call him Carl, because I don't remember his name, gave Carl and I a bunch of recruiting stuff and some leave behinds like brochures and crap. If anybody asked. So anyway, so Carl and I, get back in the car and we loaded it up with the stuff. We drive all the way back to my high school, which was a little more than an hour away. Recruiter had called the school while we were on our way and just got somebody in the main office and asked could we get like a table to set up and crap. So we show up, and so they give us this table that was in a hallway that most people use this hallway to get to the lunchroom. And of course, that's the same leave you would take when you leave. So when you're going back to your class. And obviously the plan was for us to post up there so we could ambush people with recruiting stuff. I remember feeling so ridiculous because we're all dressed up in our uniforms and there's like high school kids walking by. And the weird thing is I was one of those high school kids, just a few months ago. This is back in, would have been after Thanksgiving by the time we went and did this. But there were people walking by and, oh my God, they acted like other kids were walking out of the lunchroom acting like they didn't see us or they'd stare at us. And yes, I was feeling really self-conscious about this. But to make matters worse, the girl that I had gone to prom with coming out of the cafeteria, man, did I feel stupid. I don't know why I was feeling stupid, but I was. Because, it was a good-looking uniform, and I was pretty fit at the time. And but I guess I just felt embarrassed because I was there, essentially recruiting, but I didn't know a damn thing about the Coast Guard. Literally, other than what I learned in boot camp. But I was just there to be a presence and to fulfill some requirement. But anyway, I didn't know shit at this point about the Coast Guard. She came up to me, and while I was embarrassed that I was standing there, was also kind of excited because it's cute. And she came up to me, started talking, and it was obvious that she was definitely interested in talking with me. Although she dumped me right after prom. I know you're not listening to this podcast, but if you are, you know who you are. Anyways, not that I was totally bitter about it, but maybe I was a little bit. But it was a good conversation. It's mostly small talk and asking about boot camp and that kind of stuff. So it was chill. Carl did actually help me out by, filling in some of his own experiences while in Coast Guard boot camp. So it wasn't just me blathering on about stuff that I really didn't remember. And then also coming out of the cafeteria was the girl that I was dating just before went to boot camp. So I think technically we were still dating at this time. And so, prom date and current girlfriend, they locked eyes and gave each other the stink eye. I knew I was going to be hearing about this later. But let's face it, everyone, when you have two girls fighting over you, that was pretty cool if you ask me, but it probably wasn't. I don't think I got into any real trouble, but anyway, still pretty cool. But anyway, after seeing a few more people I knew from high school and most of them pretending to be interested, I just, they said hi and we chatted for a few. The occasional kid that would walk by was all super gung-ho, but they were usually gung-ho about the Marines or the Army and not the Coast Guard because let's face it, nobody knew anything about the Coast Guard, which I guess is one of the reasons why we were there. And anyway, so as lunch started winding down, Carl and I packed up our shit and drove back to Alexandria. We dropped off the stuff, parted ways. That was pretty much it, which brings me back to where we were just a few minutes ago, back at COMDAC school in Portsmouth. And before I forget, the girl I was dating before I went to boot camp, she and I met up a little bit later, either that day or that weekend. And she told me how the prom chick kept looking at me the whole time and that she clearly still liked me and that it was obvious. And, that was all very flattering and whatnot. But honestly, it didn't really mean a whole lot because I was going to head down to Key West soon and I'd be all by myself. And if you've already listened to season 2, that's partially true. So anyway, back to COMDAC school. Carl and I, started chatting a little bit. Again, we're back in Portsmouth, Virginia. And I asked him if he remembered the night in boot camp that he and a crap ton of other recruits were out on the parade field in Cape May and, getting cranked. And of course he did. And before I could say that it was my fault that they were out there, his face tightened and he got that stink eye again. And he says, "Was that because of you?" Man, did he look pissed. And of course, I'm like, yeah, that was because of me. And I remember that I had a stupid smile on my face. He started laughing. And then we talked about just how fucked up that night was, at least how fucked up it was for him, because we went back into the barracks and acted like we didn't see anything. And I told him what had happened to me and what it caused everyone to endure a beating and how myself and my entire company escaped that beating. We told each other what we've been up to. I think Carl had become an electrician's mate or something like that. Told him I was there because I had gone to ET school and I was in Portsmouth to go to COMDAC school. And then after that, we kind of went our separate ways and we never saw each other again, which is kind of how most things went most of the time, which now that I think about it, it's kind of a shame because I had met so many people. And obviously, I remember a bunch of them, even if only a little bit about them. So it sometimes makes me wonder, do any of them remember me? No, and that's not me having an inflated ego or anything. I just wonder, maybe it's just something that you think about when you get older. Anyone remember you? Me in this case. Will anyone remember me at all? I have no idea. But anyway, on to something less nostalgic, which will be hard to do because that's really the whole point of this podcast, right?
You've been listening to Gonzo the Coast Guard Years, written and produced by Tim Gonzalez, and I'm Nicholas Gonzalez, the voice guy. This episode was produced by Mislaid Productions.
Now, where did I put that thing?